The game was rigged before you even sat down at the table. Right now, somewhere in Manhattan, a billionaire's son is waking up in a penthouse his father bought with pocket change. He'll make 3 phone calls today that will generate more wealth than you'll see in a decade. Not because he's smarter, not because he works harder, but because of where he stands in the architecture of power. Meanwhile, you're setting an alarm for a job that will never make you rich, convinced that if you just work a little harder, sacrifice a little more, somehow you'll break through. You won't. And Machiavelli understood why 500 years before you were born. This isn't motivational content. This isn't here to make you feel better about your position. I'm here to show you the invisible machinery that ensures wealth flows upward, and why every piece of advice about hard work and determination is a calculated misdirection. By the end of this video, you'll see what they don't want you to see. The architecture, the system, the reason the rich don't just get richer by accident, but by design. Let's start with the lie you've been sold since childhood. Work hard, stay focused, play by the rules. Meritocracy will reward you. This is perhaps the most successful psychological operation ever conducted on the working class. Because here's what they don't tell you. Merit only matters if you're already in position to have it recognized. You can be brilliant in a factory and you'll die in that factory. You can be mediocre in a boardroom and you'll retire with generational wealth. Same effort, different starting points. Wildly, obscenely different outcomes. You felt this, haven't you? That gnawing suspicion that something fundamental is wrong. You watch people with half your intelligence and 1/10 of your work ethic cruise past you. You see incompetence rewarded while your competence goes unnoticed. You're told the system isn't broken, that you just need to try harder, get another certification, wake up earlier, optimize better. But late at night, when the exhaustion sets in, you know the truth. The system isn't broken. It's designed exactly as intended. And you're running uphill while they coast downhill on infrastructure their grandfathers built. The emotional cost of this realization is staggering. You're tired, not just physically tired from the extra shifts and side hustles. You're existentially tired. Tired of pretending that effort alone will save you. Tired of watching the gap widen no matter how fast you run. Tired of the cognitive dissonance between what you're told should work and what you see actually working. This exhaustion isn't weakness, it's pattern recognition. Your nervous system understands what your ideology won't let you admit. Now let me show you what Machiavelli saw. In The Prince, he wrote something that economists and motivational speakers have spent centuries trying to obscure. It is not what you do, but where you stand when you do it. Position is everything. Effort is theater. The Medici family didn't dominate Renaissance Florence because they worked harder than other merchants. They positioned themselves as the necessary intermediary between the church's wealth and Europe's power brokers. They didn't create more value. They positioned themselves where value had to flow through them. Every transaction, every deal, every movement of money and influence required their participation. That's not hard work, that's strategic positioning. Translate this to today. Why does 1 hour of a CEO's time compound differently than 1 hour of yours? Because of position. When a CEO makes a decision, it leverages an entire organizational infrastructure. Thousands of people execute. Systems multiply the impact. Capital flows in response. When you make a decision, you execute it yourself, with your own limited resources in your own limited sphere. Same hour, same human brain. Exponentially different leverage. The CEO isn't necessarily smarter. They're positioned where their choices have structural amplification. This is the brutal mathematics of position. A software engineer at Google isn't necessarily better than a software engineer at a startup, but the Google engineer has access to infrastructure, data, distribution channels, and network effects that multiply everything they touch. Position creates leverage. Effort without position is just motion. Exhausting, unrewarded motion. Here's where it gets darker. Machiavelli understood something most people never grasp. Make yourself indispensable to those who distribute resources. The poor sell time. The rich sell access. Think about that distinction. When you go to work, you're selling hours of your life for money. Linear transaction. 1 hour equals 1 payment. But the wealthy don't sell time. They sell access to systems, networks, platforms, and infrastructure that other people need. Bezos doesn't work harder than his warehouse employees. He positioned himself as the infrastructure through which commerce flows. Every transaction on Amazon, he extracts value. Not because he's involved, because of his position in the system. Zuckerberg doesn't create content. He positioned himself as the platform where attention congregates. Every advertisement, every data point, every moment of human attention on Facebook generates value that flows to his position. This is the dependency matrix. The rich don't participate in markets. They become the market infrastructure. And once you're infrastructure, you're indispensable. You're not competing anymore. You're taxing everyone who is. The psychological mechanism here is crucial. The poor operate from scarcity mindset because they're actually scarce. Scarce in time, scarce in capital, scarce in access. So they optimize for immediate survival. Take the job that pays now, make the safe choice, avoid risk because risk means potential ruin. But the wealthy operate from positional abundance. They can take risks because their position provides a safety net. They can wait for asymmetric opportunities because their position generates passive income. They can invest in relationships and long-term plays because their position isn't precarious. This creates a vicious cycle. Your scarcity forces short-term thinking, which prevents positional moves, which maintains your scarcity. Their abundance enables long-term positioning, which compounds their advantage, which increases their abundance. Same species, same planet, different games entirely. And here's what makes this truly Machiavellian. They need you to believe in meritocracy. They need you focused on working harder, getting better, optimizing your productivity. Because as long as you're focused on effort, you're not focused on position. As long as you believe the game is fair, you won't question why they're playing with different rules. The mythology of meritocracy isn't a mistake. It's a strategic narrative designed to keep you running on a treadmill while they build elevators. Machiavelli wasn't teaching immorality. He was teaching visibility. He was making explicit what power prefers to keep implicit. And the first law of power is this: position precedes everything. Before effort, before merit, before virtue. Where you stand determines what your actions can accomplish. And the rich understand this at a level that would horrify you if you truly saw it. Let me show you how deep this architecture goes. The third law is where most people's understanding completely breaks down, because they're still thinking linearly while the game is being played exponentially. The law of compound position. Machiavelli observed something in the courts of Renaissance Italy that modern economists dress up in sanitized language, but the core truth remains savage. Small advantages consistently leveraged become insurmountable fortresses, not because the advantage itself is insurmountable, but because position compounds in ways that effort never can. Here's what they don't tell you. When you have $10,000 and you need to invest it, you get access to a standard brokerage account. Maybe if you're sophisticated, an index fund with 0.05% fees. You're playing the public game with public rules and public returns. But when you have $10 million, suddenly you have access to hedge funds with minimum investments that exclude 99% of the population. You get invited to private equity deals. You receive calls about pre-IPO opportunities. The same market, the same economy, but you're playing in a different dimension entirely. And it cascades, because when you make returns in that exclusive space, you're not just making money, you're making connections with others who have access. You're building relationships with fund managers who remember you when the next opportunity emerges. You're positioning yourself in networks where information flows before it becomes news. The Bloomberg terminal on your desk shows the same numbers as everyone else's, but you're getting the call 30 minutes before the headline breaks. This is compound position. Your returns aren't just financial, they're positional. Every successful investment moves you closer to the center of the network where the next deal originates. Every connection introduces you to 3 more people who control access to opportunities that don't have public application processes. You're not climbing a ladder anymore. You've been lifted onto an escalator that only people at your altitude can even see. Meanwhile, someone working just as intelligently, just as hard, with the same risk tolerance, but without that initial position. They're getting 7% annual returns and thinking they're winning because that's better than a savings account. They don't even know the game, they're not invited to exists. The market isn't inefficient, it's stratified. And the stratification is protected by minimum investment requirements, accreditation laws, and social networks that function as invisible walls. Write in the comments the moment you realize the game had levels you weren't accessing. Because that recognition is where your repositioning begins. The mathematics of this are deliberately obscured. They'll tell you about compound interest, show you charts of savings growing over 30 years, sell you the dream of retirement if you just stay consistent. But they won't show you the comparison. They won't put side by side what happens when someone with position compounds versus when someone without position saves. Because if they did, the entire mythology would collapse. Let me make it explicit. Two people, same age, same intelligence, same work ethic. One inherits $200,000 at 25. Not even wealthy, just positioned. They put it into a diversified portfolio. They get access to slightly better investment vehicles because they meet certain thresholds, and they benefit from being able to take risks because they have a cushion. 40 years later, with modest returns and no additional contributions, that position has compounded into millions. Not because they were smarter, because they were positioned. The second person, starting from zero, saving aggressively, doing everything the financial advisors recommend. 40 years later, they have a respectable nest egg. Comfortable retirement, maybe. But not generational wealth, not position-creating capital. And their children start from roughly where they started, maybe slightly elevated, but still outside the compound position game. This is the law. Position doesn't just create advantage in the moment, it creates compounding advantage across time. And the gap doesn't narrow, it widens, exponentially, until you're looking at a world where someone's great-great-grandfather's position still determines their descendants' access to opportunity today. Now the fourth law is where it gets truly Machiavellian, because this is where the position don't just benefit from the system, they actively shape it. The law of manufactured scarcity. Machiavelli understood that the prince who controls the perception of scarcity controls value itself. Not actual scarcity, perceived scarcity. And the modern elite have turned this into an art form so sophisticated that their targets actually defend the system that constrains them. Look at luxury brands. A handbag that costs $80 to manufacture sells for $8,000. Not because of quality, though they'll craft elaborate stories about Italian leather and artisan craftsmanship, but because the scarcity is manufactured. Limited releases, waiting lists, a psychological positioning that owning this item places you in an exclusive category. They're not selling bags, they're selling position. And the scarcity that creates the value is entirely artificial. But that's the obvious example. The real power move is in credentialism. The wealthy have created a system where access to position requires credentials, and then they've controlled the institutions that grant those credentials. Ivy League universities don't primarily provide better education, they provide positional access. The network, the signal, the brand that opens doors. And here's the brilliant cruelty of it. They've made these institutions artificially scarce. Harvard could double its class size tomorrow without diminishing educational quality. The professors could teach twice as many students. The facilities could accommodate more, but they don't, because scarcity is the product. A Harvard degree is valuable precisely because most people can't get one. The education is secondary to the positional marker. Then they've wrapped this manufactured scarcity in the language of merit. The best and brightest, the most deserving. As if the admissions process isn't heavily weighted toward legacy students, children of donors, and those who could afford the private schools and test prep, and extracurricular positioning that makes an application competitive. They've created a system that looks like a meritocracy but functions as a position preservation machine, and it cascades into every industry. Want to be a doctor? Medical schools artificially limit enrollment, creating a scarcity of physicians that keep salaries high and access restricted. Want to practice law? Bar associations control who gets licensed. Want to start a business in certain sectors? Regulatory capture ensures that compliance costs are high enough to exclude anyone without significant capital. The positioned aren't just benefiting from scarcity, they're manufacturing it, creating barriers that look like standards, gatekeeping that presents as quality control. And the psychological operation is so effective that people outside the gates actually defend the system, believing that if they just work hard enough, they too can get through. Not understanding that the gate itself is the product, and keeping most people outside is the point. This is Machiavellian strategy at its finest. The prince doesn't just hold the fortress. He convinces everyone outside that the fortress is there for good reasons, that it protects important values, that attempting to tear it down would be destructive rather than liberating. Now we arrive at the fifth law, and this is where most people's perception completely fails them. Because they're looking for villains, for conscious conspiracy, for someone to blame, and that very search blinds them to how the deepest power actually operates. The law of strategic invisibility. Machiavelli wrote that the greatest power is exercised without being seen, not hidden in the sense of secret meetings in dark rooms, though those exist, but invisible because it's structural, embedded in systems that appear natural, inevitable, just the way things are. This is structural violence. The term sounds academic, but the reality is visceral. It's the way systems do the oppressing, so no individual has to feel like an oppressor. No one person is holding you down, but somehow you can't rise. The system itself has become the mechanism of control, and because it's diffuse, it's nearly impossible to fight. Look at the offshore financial architecture. Trusts in the Cayman Islands, foundations in Liechtenstein, shell companies nested within shell companies across 5 jurisdictions. This isn't tax evasion in the illegal sense, though it certainly evades the spirit of contribution. This is position protected by complexity. The wealthy have created a financial labyrinth so intricate that even if you knew it existed, you couldn't navigate it without expensive specialists. And those specialists only work with clients who already have the position to make their fees worthwhile. The system isn't hidden. It's publicly legal, but it's invisible to most people because the complexity itself is the barrier. You can't fight what you can't understand. You can't change rules that require a team of international tax attorneys just to comprehend. The invisibility isn't secrecy. It's sophistication beyond the reach of those it disadvantages. And then there's the psychological warfare. The mythology of meritocracy isn't an accident. It's a strategic narrative that keeps the masses focused on effort rather than position. As long as you believe that working harder will change your outcome, you won't question why effort and outcome are so disconnected in the first place. You'll blame yourself for not working hard enough rather than examining the architecture that determines what your work can accomplish. This is the ultimate positional power, shaping the rules while appearing to play by them. The wealthy don't break laws. They fund the think tanks that write the policy papers that influence the legislators who craft the laws. By the time a rule is implemented, it's already been shaped to preserve their position. And it looks legitimate because it went through official channels, had public comment periods, was debated and voted on. The power is invisible because it's procedural. It's boring. It's in the details of tax code subsections and regulatory frameworks that no one reads. While everyone's watching the spectacle of politics, the real decisions are being made in meetings between lobbyists and staffers, in draft legislation written by industry groups, in judicial appointments that will interpret laws for decades. Machiavelli understood this. The prince who must be seen exercising power is weak. The prince whose power is embedded in the structure itself, who shapes the game board rather than just playing on it. That prince is truly secure. And the modern elite have taken this principle and scaled it to a global system. You are not broken. You have been positionally disadvantaged. And that distinction is everything, because broken things need fixing. But disadvantaged positions can be changed. Not easily, not quickly, but strategically. Seeing this architecture doesn't make you cynical. It makes you clear. Awareness is the first form of power available to those outside position. Because once you see how the game actually works, you stop playing by rules designed for your failure.